Welcome to the Blogger Genius Podcast, brought to you by MiloTree. Here's your host, Jillian Leslie.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Blogger Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Jillian Leslie, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've founded Catch My Party, the MiloTree pop-up app, and our new payment tool called MiloTreeCart to empower creators like you to easily sell and get paid for digital products on the internet. So digital product is anything from a paid workshop to a membership to coaching to services to eBooks to digital downloads. If you have an audience and are not selling digital products directly to them, you are missing out on thousands of dollars in income. Check it out, MiloTreeCart.com. Email me at Jillian@MiloTree.com. I'd love to help you get set up. I think we've built something that many of you can use to grow your businesses. For today's episode, I'm super excited to welcome Casey Markee from MediaWise back on the show. His first episode was one of my most popular. He is the SEO expert. He works with every big food blogger. He is all about getting you traffic. You want the most cutting edge SEO strategies? This is the episode for you. In fact, I think you will listen to it more than once. So, without further delay, here is my interview with Casey. Casey, welcome back to the Blogger Genius Podcast.
Jillian, thank you so much for having me. Today, I know that this is probably going to be delayed, and you'll probably have this live in a couple of weeks. But today is my 22nd wedding anniversary. My wife was so kind enough to let me do an interview today, mostly because it gave her an excuse to go shopping.
Nice.
So that's what she's doing right now. 22 years. And now that's in Casey time, it's a factor of 3. So she feels like she's been married almost 6 decades. That's probably how it is.
Wow. And what are you doing to celebrate?
Well, dinner. We'll do dinner out and leave the kids home. That's a good thing about having teenagers. We don't have to worry about them necessarily burning the house down, though the large parties are always a concern. So we'll have to keep the cameras on while we're out. Good times.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. I can assure you that my many friends did not believe that I would make it 2 years, much less 22 years. I married up. They always kid about, you marrying out of your weight class. I absolutely did that. So I'm very fortunate.
Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. So we have a lot of SEO stuff to talk about, especially since our last podcast episode, which, by the way, is one of my highest ranking podcast episodes. I just have to tell you.
I'm gonna. My goal is for it to be your highest rated.
I love that.
Highest one. So if you're on the call and you didn't listen to the first one, it is jam packed with stuff. So I definitely would recommend it. It's gonna be very good.
I will link to it in the show notes. So Here's the thing. This is the thing that I keep hearing about, and I wanted to pick your brain on this, Casey. Please tell me about the May core update.
Yeah, no problem. So the May core update rolled out. It was announced by Google. Google rarely announces updates, but they've been very good at announcing what they consider core updates, which are significant updates that affect a larger percentage than any of the dozens or hundreds of regular changes to the algorithm they make on a daily and weekly basis. But the most recent update, the May core update, as it's been coined, rolled out on May the 25th. The rollout lasted roughly about 2 weeks and was completed on or about the June the 9th, though honestly, we saw tremors all the way up until the 14th of the month. For those of us who monitor this regularly, and again, I'm one of many people who, again, I focus on site auditing, so core updates are very important. A core update can be confusing. It can be certainly discouraging and disconcerting for the average site owner. But for the vast majority of people, they never notice. There's nothing that really happens. I have numerous people who say, "Oh my God, was I affected by the core update?" And we'll go in, and there's literally no issues at all on the site, or maybe the fact that they had a weekend drop in traffic, but that's seasonally related. It's not related to the core update at all. But core updates, can be scary. And basically, how these work is that a core update is basically Google making dramatic broad changes to their algorithms and systems. Sometimes these are designed to ensure that they're delivering the most relevant and authoritative content to searchers. Sometimes they're designed to address a problem that they've detected in their algorithms. Maybe they're noticing that, generally that maybe when we have core updates in the past that have affected specific niches, like the payday loan issue, or we've had sites that were affiliate in nature that were taken down a peg as a whole. But core updates are there to address systemic issues that are supposed to increase the ability of Google to return the highest quality, relevant, and authoritative rankings based on query matching.
So is there anything you can do if there is a core update and you've been impacted? Like, will you know why? Or if you are following best practices, should you be able to ride through it?
And that's a good point. I mean, if you've been doing things as you should be doing them, in other words, you've been publishing high quality content, you've been making your site as fast and as user friendly as possible, you haven't been participating in link schemes, you haven't been buying links, you haven't been using AI software to write your content, maybe you haven't.
Wait. I have to freeze you there. Can we talk about this? This is this whole new exploding thing. I feel like it just kind of exploded on the scene within the last, say, 6 months. And there are companies like Jasper, RankIQ, their whole host Copy AI. And it felt like all of a sudden, just boom, you could now type in a little bit of what you want this AI to spew out, and it will. And the promise seems to be, it will write your blog post for you.
Well, that's certainly the promise, but the reality is far from that. The reality is a stark contrast. Google has very clearly said, and this happened on actually April 13th of this year. Google actually updated their guidelines, their webmaster guidelines, to say, quote, again, AI generated content is against their guidelines. Now that's really interesting that they updated their guidelines on 4/13, and then lo and behold, we had a core update a little over a month later. And the reason I bring that up is that we don't necessarily think, I think things like, RankIQ and Jasper AI and AdThrive has a topic tool that uses AI generation. And we also have Phrase and Writer, which are all very popular algorithms that you can use tool-based. I think that they have their strengths and weaknesses, but I think we also have noticeable issues now where following this core update, I've had people reach out to me and say, oh my God, Casey, I don't know what happened. And I'm like, well, and I have them do a survey. And 20% of the people who were affected were using a tool they probably shouldn't have been using. And not necessarily RankIQ, although a lot of people who were using RankIQ did have some fallout.
No, wait, RankIQ is just giving you, though, search topics and keywords. So you're writing the content.
Supposedly, but you can actually rely on that a little bit too much. You can even do that along with Jasper and other phrase things. And I see a lot of people mixing various AI tools to their disadvantage. The thing about an AI tool to understand is that it's only as good as the user using it. So I've had plenty of people use RankIQ and completely obliterate their listings because they over-optimized. And so the thing to understand about a tool is that you're only as good as your ability to use the tool correctly. Rank AI, for example, is telling you, hey, I got to rewrite this post. And by the way, you should go ahead and add this keyword phrase to every one of your headings, which is I've seen relatively common over the last several months. You're going to hurt yourself because that's the kind of over-optimization that Google's been targeting in core updates since the unannounced update of November 2019.
Okay, so I want to pause you there, but I want to pause you there. So you're saying in your headings, you do not want to go like, let's say,
it's just apple pie. If you're writing an apple pie post, I'm not going to say apple pie ingredients. I'm not going to say FAQs for apple pie. I'm not going to say step-by-step instructions to make apple pie. I'm not going to say apple pie ingredients. That kind of nonsensical optimization went out years ago, and it's really decimated a lot of bloggers because what was happening, especially in the food and lifestyle niche, is that you had these really poor, low-quality SEO classes that were going around based on outdated Neil Patel nonsense, where you were basically training people to write blog posts on recipes, where you would just literally hammer in every heading on the page, your H1, your H2s, your H3s, your SB cards, this focus keyword, and that was decimating listings right and left. several of these core updates have now really, especially the ones that came out in November and then February and May and June of 2021, that we found that a lot of these sites that were hit by these were over optimizing their posts in that aspect with headings. Myself and others had done, I believe Top Hat Rank specifically had done a very detailed analysis of the sites affected by the November core update in 2019 now, and that was released. They had another one in February of 2020 soon after that, and the analysis was that these sites all shared very similar characteristics, and that they were just horribly over optimizing their headings with focus keywords. And that's still something we see, but it's certainly not as dramatic as it was.
Now, can I use Jasper, get a bunch of text on my topic and kind of rewrite that text, use it as a, let's say, rough draft? And will I get penalized?
Well,
could it be almost like a
question?
Well,
I'm just going to literally tell you what John Mueller will say. It says, quote, "If you're using machine learning tools to generate your content, it's essentially the same as if you're just shuffling words around, looking up synonyms, or using translation tricks that people used to do. These kind of things for us will automatically be generated content and viewed as such, and it will be against our guidelines. We would strongly urge you not to do it. We would consider such a practice as spam." End quote. This is John Mueller. I don't know why anyone would say that there is no risk in using any kind of AI generated tool, because there clearly is. I mean, the problem is that Google has a lot of doublespeak. Google will say, "Oh, we're against AI generated content," and then they'll literally use AI generated content every day. They've been using AI to rewrite local business information as part of Google Maps for years. That's how they update operating hours. That's how they update amenities for locations, all of that nonsense. So it's more of a do what we say, not what we do kind of situation. And I just, my goal is when I have an audit, I just tell people, hey, here is the risks of what your process is. And here are some suggestions that we can use to dial in your content so that it's less machine reading, more optimized for users and usability. And so we tend to be more successful in that aspect. So kind of going back to the core updates, because we don't want to get too far off the topic here, Jillian, is that with core updates, you're asking what can bloggers do if they've been affected by a core update? Well, we want to conduct a traffic drop audit, and I'm going to provide a link. You can provide those in the show notes. We have a whole webinar on how to conduct a traffic drop audit. What is it? Your goal is to find themes. Is there a specific part of your content that was affected? Maybe the issue isn't your content at all. Maybe the issue is that Google changed the intent on several of your top keywords and pages. So we had this happen last summer, during the June core update of 2021, where, actually the May and July actually is when it happened. May and July core updates is Google changed the intent around a significant amount of keyword terms and it affected roundups specifically in the recipe niche. So
can you break that, what that means? Yeah, great. Give me an example.
Chicken recipes, great example. Chicken recipes, probably the most popular term for food and lifestyle bloggers, chicken recipes. And chicken recipes, if someone typed in chicken recipes, it used to be that there was a lot of individual recipes being shown up under chicken recipes. And now that's not the case. It's more roundup focused because it's plural. It's more of a Google trying to return multiple examples of that. So if someone was trying to type in, a good example would have been Chinese recipes, which was another one, or even Instant Pot recipes or slow cooker recipes. Google has refined the intent down to where they're showcasing more roundups, more guides. And because of that, a lot of bloggers would kind of be like, oh my God, my traffic dropped 23%. And we're finding that as we go in and we look at the keyword granular data, we're finding that it's just because Google stopped ranking some of their individual recipes for these really general keyword queries, which had a more refined intent. And so we don't want to do that. And that's very common. And so for those of you on the call, and maybe this is something, there's always a change of intent. There's always these core updates. It's never just one issue, folks. These core updates have, you've heard the term baby algorithms. It was coined many years ago, but baby algorithms, these core updates contain hundreds, if not millions, of these core baby algorithms, which all work together to determine what results are returned. And it's the refining of the query intent overall. And so take a look at what's dropped, see if the intent on those, see if the results on those keywords have changed specifically, see if there was a carousel, maybe a carousel has been added, maybe a carousel has been eliminated. This May core update really changed carousel visibility considerably. Google added a web story carousel to mobile, which is more prominent. Google also has added and lowered the amount of results they're showing in carousels now. So that's going to hurt you. Whereas before we might have seen 4 or 6 results on mobile for various queries, now we're seeing half of those. And that's going to hurt your visibility considerably.
So wait, so here is a question.
Mm-hmm.
Are web stories still a thing? Do you recommend people be creating them? So based on what you were saying, were you saying there were more now on mobile showing up in results, fewer? I couldn't quite tell. But
well, there's certainly more visibility for web stories because now there's a definite carousel on mobile as opposed to previously where it was just discover based.
Right.
And now there's actually new actual web story carousel that's actually showing on mobile for a lot of queries. So you would think, okay, hey, that means that we should focus a little bit more on web stories. But here's the problem.
Okay.
There is now literally 10 times, and that's a conservative estimate of the amount of web stories now as opposed to say just 6 months ago. And so it's substantially more competitive. In my experience, for most people using web stories, they're lucky to get 10 to 12% of their web stories even showing up or even having discernible traffic. They're publishing 50 web stories to get maybe 5 or 6 that generate traffic. And the problem with web stories is that they're not great experiences.
No,
they don't monetize well. And we certainly, you certainly would not want to link to them prominently on your site. Why would I want to drive traffic from a $30 RPM post to a web story that might make me $3 specifically? And that's being generous with the RPM on web stories. They're horrible. It's really terrible. It'd be like betting on me to run a marathon. It's very low odds that I'm going to finish in under a day.
So when you are working with a food blogger, are you saying, and again, one of our biggest constraints, of course, is time.
Yeah.
Are you saying just right now, don't do it? Because I remember it being the newest thing, and I did podcast episodes about creating web stories, and it was this secret way.
For a while. Yeah.
And you're saying, you know what? Spend your time creating high quality content.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a completely different environment for web stories now as opposed to a year ago. A year ago, you had a lot more success getting web stories. The bigger bloggers who are still doing web stories are not doing them themselves. They're hiring that out to someone else to do them for them. And hopefully they can generate enough traffic bottom line to make the expense worthwhile. But I'm going to tell you, the cottage industry that has popped up where, you're paying $300, $400 or $500 for like 5 or 6 web stories, to me, complete waste of time. Because think about how much traffic you have to pull from those web stories to get back the RPM to make that back. It's relatively, it's not a great proposition for most people. So yeah, I mean, if you're starting out and your goal is to try to qualify for Mediavine and you have the time, sure, invest in some web stories. It's just another avenue for you. I have clients who've been able to monetize for Mediavine in 90 to 120 days, and they've done it through web stories. But then it's a big rude awakening when they log on and Mediavine tells them, oh, by the way, this is really going to destroy your RPM, and you really kind of want to focus, maybe we kind of transition away from web stories and focus on another content vehicle that's going to be a little bit more attractive for you long term.
Okay. So you said to me that you were you said we should talk about Google search, and and it breaks down into these following areas: meaning, relevance, quality, usability, and context. And what did you mean by that?
Well, exactly. Google has a very detailed resource on how search works, and they try to break it down as well as they can. And these 5 areas, these are 5 key factors that help determine which Google results are returned for which query on the site. So if we break them down one at a time, let's start with the meaning. And so when we're talking about meaning, we're talking about meaning of the query. So to return relevant results, we have to, of course, establish what we're looking for. And that's why Google builds language models that they use repeatedly to determine how these results are going to look before we see them at the front end. Now, Google has gotten pretty good at recognizing and correcting spelling mistakes. They've gotten really good at understanding synonyms, which is why we've moved beyond synonyms years ago. We always get the question about, for example, I get a lot of bloggers who are based in the UK, and they're like, man, do I need to change my entire writing to be more US based so that I can start generating more traffic from the US? And Google's really good at understanding the difference between US English and UK English. And I've had bloggers who tell me with mixed results. We've had some bloggers who've literally living in the UK that they literally, you would never know it. They are using US based language on everything. They're trying to make sure all their posts are US based English as much as possible. And in many cases, we've seen no impact from that at all. And we've seen other bloggers where they've literally done nothing to try to, other than making sure that we're hosting in the US. We don't have a .co.uk extension where I'm trying to write content that I think American audience will like, and they've been able to grow their American audience just fine without having to change their entire language and logistics. And a lot of that comes down to this first part, which is the meaning of the query, which is that Google can understand what people are trying to type in and optimize accordingly. So that's the first part of it, meaning. Then we come down, of course, to the next section, which is the relevance. And the relevance is really where a lot of bloggers struggle with it. We just talked about it with regards to the fact that Google is refining relevance. We call this query refinement or query optimization, where Google is now saying, well, if someone's looking for chicken recipes, they're not necessarily looking for one chicken recipe. Maybe we're going to go ahead and return this roundup, which has 50 plus top chicken recipes. And maybe we can refine these other queries accordingly. But the most basic signal to Google that something is relevant is that the page contains the keywords that the searcher is using for. And this is something that we have to continue to work on, because as important as it is for bloggers still need to write content that's relevant for the keyword that they're ranking for. So we have to understand that it's not just, we want to have a focused keyword on a page, but we also need to be thinking about related entities around that page when we're talking about relevance. I always use the example of, Abraham Lincoln. If I had any chance of trying to rank on the first page of Google for any resource on Abraham Lincoln, there are various known entities that are known around Abraham Lincoln. His wife, Mary Todd, his kids, his assassination, the Gettysburg Address. These are all known interlinked entities that Google has associated in the semantic web around the topic of Abraham Lincoln. And so I would try to write a complete resource that incorporates those entities into my post. And you have to do the same thing with your average recipe post, with your average SEO post, whatever it is. Your goal is to find these related keywords, they're not synonyms. People get confused by that. Google still uses synonyms, but they were moved beyond that a long time ago. You've probably heard of the term LSI keyword, or latent Semitic indexing keywords. It's a lot of nonsense that you hear people talk about all the time. Google hasn't used LSI keywords in literally decades, would be the guess. There really is no such thing as LSI keywords. What those are is what we're talking about really is related keywords. What we're talking about is Semitic keywords. What we're talking about are things that are related to the topic at hand, like our Abraham Lincoln example. And that's what we're optimizing.
I want to take a short break to say that SEO can feel like a lot. So to make it easier, I created a Google Analytics cheat sheet. Google Analytics gives me a headache, and every time I go there, I never know what I'm looking for. So I created this for you, where it gives you the 3 data points you need and how to find them. So these are things like, what are your top blog posts? How many page views do you actually have? And where is your traffic coming from? If you know these 3 numbers, you've got a pretty good picture of how your blog is doing. So to grab this cheat sheet, super easy, go to MiloTree.com/GA for Google Analytics. MiloTree.com/GA. And I know that this will take the overwhelm out for so many of you. Hundreds of people have downloaded this. So again, MiloTree.com/GA. And now back to the show. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
My dream is to rank for Abraham Lincoln on the first page. I have two strategies. One is I create the ultimate guide to Abraham Lincoln. And this post is so long, and it includes his wife and his children and his childhood and the Gettysburg Address and the assassination and all of this information in one post. Or do I create a kind of main post where, let's say, I touch on all of these topics, but then I go into detail about his marriage or his childhood, and I am going to link all of these supporting posts around my, let's say, cornerstone post.
Yeah, I hate that word.
Okay.
So let's talk about that.
Which strategy?
Cornerstone. So understand that cornerstone content is just a fantastic marketing method. There's no such thing. Cornerstone content is just you saying, hey, this is an important piece of content. I'm going to designate it as a cornerstone on my site so that I'm reminded naturally to link to it. It's utter nonsense. Okay, we're going to link to our regular content regularly. If you need a reminder for that and it makes you feel better to go into Yoast and set something up as cornerstone, fine. But understand that setting something as cornerstone doesn't do anything for you, as do most of the offered optimizations that Yoast provides you. Now, in your example, you're talking about content clusters. Content clusters can work, whereas you have a large, an initial high quality piece of content, and you're linking into that content with other supporting things. Like, for example, if I wanted to publish a chicken and dumplings recipe, I might also publish what other side dishes go great with chicken and dumplings, and I would link all those together. The problem is that is kind of antiquated. You have to go beyond that considerably. You're not going to have much luck, especially if you have very little inherent authority on your site, having those clusters linked together. And it's the same thing when we talk about how Google search works. We talked about meaning, we talked about relevance. Now we have to go to the next one, which is quality. Because I could have a fantastic resource, like you said, that was very relevant, but if the quality is not there, then we're going to have trouble. And one of the factors that we have to understand with Google and understanding quality is the most important signal to them. A good sign that something is well trusted is what? That it has links to it. And that's, I think, where bloggers get confused, is that when we're talking about, when we go and we've done talking about the meaning, we've moved to relevance, we've got a great resource here. Now we have to go to quality. If I've got this fantastic resource, maybe I've used RankIQ to write some fantastic resource, and I've even got other supplementary posts on the side and I've linked to them. That means absolutely nothing if the quality of the content is not viewed as high quality by Google. Well, how can something be viewed as high quality from a third party? And that's where the concept of linking comes into play. We have to make sure that we're linking internally to this content regularly. We have to make sure that we have external links. It doesn't matter if I think that I have the best resource in the world on Abraham Lincoln, if no one externally is linking to it and telling me as such. And I think that's where bloggers struggle. It's like, I don't understand. It's like anyone who would come on a podcast and say, hey, you want to do better, just write a longer resource that's more detailed. I'm sure you've heard that before, even on your own podcast. That's the kind of nonsense that you definitely do not want to take at face value, because word count is not now, nor has it ever been a ranking factor. Longer is not better. Longer is just longer. Our goal is to write the most detailed resource we can, within, and also not lose sight of the fact that it's usable. Maybe I don't want to read 1,000 words on artichoke hearts. Okay, maybe I only need to write a 350 word report that answers all the questions, and that's going to be better for the user. And so that's really where a lot of this SEO nonsense comes by, is you'll have experts come on and say, yeah, you just need to, use maybe the skyscraper approach and write this really long piece of content that's 10 times better than everything else. Google has really moved beyond that. It's not a matter of writing a longer and more detailed report. It's covering all these issues we're talking about. It's making sure that you understand that meaning, relevance, quality, usability, and the context, these 5 areas when we talk about how Google's ranking content, all come into play. And, we're on quality right now. So one of the things we're determining is we really want to make sure that the content that we're providing has a right balance between being relevant and being authoritative, which means that we can trust it. And also, of course, that we've got links to it from sources.
And how, okay, so this is always this weird conundrum.
Yeah.
How do I get links to my Abraham Lincoln
Content.
post?
Right. And that's where the rub is. You can do many things. You can go in and literally start stalking every Abraham Lincoln forum on the internet and dropping your links and getting people who are considered experts or have some topical basis background in Abraham Lincoln to consider your resource and link to that. Or you could literally hire other people to do this for you. The scary thing is that
what do you mean hire other people?
Link building.
Outreach.
Hire link builders, outreach for your link building. And here's the thing to understand. Paid links to Google they're against it. Honestly, Google is against all link building. Google basically believes in a vacuum, if content is really great, people are going to link to it, which is just extremely an infantile approach because that's not how the world works. If you want to rank for something, you have to go out and get links to it. How do you get links to it? Well, you can push for those links. You can pull those links by means of push and pull marketing. You can hire someone who's going to market that content for you. You can hire a PR agent to do nothing but pitch you and your content. You can hire a firm who's hopefully going to go out and build some links for you. This happens, and it'd be silly and naive for anyone on the call to think that it's not happening to both the average blogger and the largest known brands in your niche. It's happening, and it's happening every day. That's how link building works. People go out and they get links. If they can find a paid link that's relevant and on target, they're absolutely going to get that link. Is it against guidelines? Absolutely.
Does Google know? Does Google crack down on that? Will they know if you're somehow paying for a link?
I think the simplest way to say that is if Google can know something, you should just assume they do. And you should just determine whether or not that risk is worthy of the effort that you're putting in. I think that when I have my audits with clients, I have a very detailed section on link building in my audit follow-up, and it has kind of the regular normal stuff about, hey, here, sign up for Harrow and see if we have any on-point press mentions, or if there's a reporter out there looking for something that might match with you, we can respond to that. Or, oh, by the way, here is a list of the top link sharing groups in your niche, and these people are looking to share your content with their audience, depending upon if the content is on point. And oh, by the way, here's some roundup groups. These are bloggers who are actively putting together roundups that are based around seasonal or holiday specific content, and your goal is to be Jenny on the spot and drop your links in accordingly. Or, oh, by the way, here's a list of podcasts and interview requests that people are looking to interview. Go ahead and come up with a 90-second elevator pitch and pitch yourself to these people on this list.
Now, what if
out there?
What if my best friend is also a food blogger and we go, hey, I'll link to you and you link to me?
Totally fine.
Now,
totally fine.
Is it true though that you don't want that reciprocal link, or that's fine?
No. See, that's a myth. Reciprocal links are not bad. Reciprocal links at scale are bad. So if I go out and I have 1,000 people and they're all trading links with each other, that provides a pattern which Google can easily suss out algorithmically. And that's something that we don't want to do. But if you have a couple friends and you're linking back forth to each other when it makes sense to your users, great. Where bloggers get into trouble is they're doing this over and over and over again. So that if I run a link graph on a site and I see that there's 100 links and they're all linking back and forth to each other, and I can see that myself by running a simple piece of software, what do you think Google sees when they run that and they see it algorithmically? Most likely they're just ignoring all those links at scale, and you're not getting much benefit from those.
Would you get penalized?
Google doesn't really penalize much anymore for that kind of stuff. They've made it automatic, and they've said this repeatedly. Both John Mueller has said this repeatedly. This has been said at many of the past conferences over the last several years. Google's automated a lot of this stuff so that they don't need to worry about penalizing it. If they see a pattern, then they can just go ahead and ignore those links. And that's the thing, is that over the last 10, 15 years, Google's probably, and I'm just going to use the term disavow because it's something that a lot of people understand. Google's disavowed or taking away the ability of a link to pass authority, probably from a good 20 to 30% of the entire web, because those links just don't have the value that they used to have. The links are expired, they're low quality, they're spam related. Google just ignores them. And it's hilarious because when Google talks about link building, they're very clear about one thing. even Google doesn't know which links provide value in their algorithms. They're very clear about that. No one knows. That's why whenever you see a tool that says, oh my God, I'm running a toxicity analysis on my links, it's a complete and utter crapshoot. It's not something you should ever worry about. If Google doesn't know what a toxic links looks like and which links are passing value, how do you expect a tool to be able to show that? And it doesn't. So for those of you on the call who have lost sleep over having, oh my God, I have a Moz spam score, or SEMrush keeps emailing me about these toxic links, go outside, sit on your porch and say, yell at the top of your lungs, I hate toxic links, because literally that's going to have the same effect on your backlink profile as you worrying or doing any of these silly recommendations from SEMrush or Moz. That's just not how search works.
But yet Google is, of course, this is a huge input or indicator that you've got links. So Google's just saying, we don't
Google
exactly know why this is like which links are important.
Well, Google has always said that they have the ability at their end to understand if a link is relevant or not, but they can never tell you exactly what the breakdown of that link is.
Got it.
Or what those links are. And I think they play that stuff very close to their chest. But I think where Google will tell you this all the time. John Mueller was just on Twitter just a couple months ago saying that there's no such thing as a toxic link. There is no such thing as a spam score. And sometimes it's very tongue in cheek when he says that stuff, but mostly there is a hint of truth to it. It's just that you should not be worrying about things like domain authority, which are just made up metrics that Google doesn't use. There's a way for you to classify yourself against other sites, but it's not something you should lose sleep over. Your goal is to provide the best content you can. Your goal is to attract links naturally. Your goal is to go out and find related sites and audiences that will send you traffic. The most valuable link, and any builder will tell you this, the most valuable link out there is a link that sends you traffic. End of story. That's what your goal should be. Any link that you're finding out there, whether it's follow, no follow, or whatever, if it's sending you traffic, it's a good link. And that's one of the simplest ways to understand when you're approaching link building.
We've talked about meaning, relevance, quality, usability, and context. Have we touched on usability and context?
Well, and usability is a big one. So when Google is talking about usability, the goal of Google is to make sure that all content is accessible by everyone out there. And accessibility is a big point of there. Now, we get this question a lot. Is accessibility a ranking factor? Well, yes and no, because part of accessibility is making sure that we use things like alt text, making sure that we actually make sure that our images say what they are. If someone's blind and they're sitting next to me and I'm showing them a picture in the front, and it's a slice of banana cream pie on a gray plate with some yellow bunting in the background, that's descriptive. I want to do that because it allows someone who cannot see the photo to understand what they're actually not seeing to begin with. That kind of accessibility is very important, and that could be a ranking factor. Alt text is a ranking factor, as is things like captions and imageability, image size, things like that. We want to optimize for accessibility when we can. Things like color contrast errors can lead to nuisance lawsuits. We've got numerous people still running around the United States suing sites if their color contrast ratio is off, because that's discriminatory to those with visual disabilities. So we have to worry about this stuff in an aspect, but it's not really going to move the needle a ton on the bottom line search engine rankings for the average site. It's just something that we do because it's good to be a good neighbor. It's good to make our content accessible to everyone. So in Google's case, when they're talking about usability, it really comes down to their page experience aspects, which is the page experience algorithm that they launched. It's been about 1.5 years now. And they want to make sure that all the content is mobile friendly. They want to make sure that the content loads fast over the typical 3G and 4G connections. They want to make sure that when you're running ads, that we want the content to pop in first and then the ads to pop in second. So those of you on the call, if you're with Mediavine, congratulations. They understand that. They've lazy loaded their ads for years. For those of you who are on AdThrive, understand that this is a drawback, and it's something we continually to fight AdThrive about. AdThrive likes to load their ads first and then the content. They're to the point where they've really dug their heels in the sand and said, we don't have any evidence that this is bad for users. And in fact, if we turn on lazy loading, they call it deferred ad loading, you can expect to lose 5% of your income. I'm going to tell you folks on the call, if you're with AdThrive, that's a 5% well spent, because no one likes to have a post that takes 30 plus seconds to load fully. Okay, if I'm on a site and I'm on an AdThrive site, I'm navigating, I can tell immediately on my mobile device who has deferred ad loading on and who doesn't, because the ads pop in first, then the content. So our goal is to always have the content pop in first, then the ads. So please, please, please turn on deferred ad loading. Please nag your AdThrive rep and make sure that that's on. It's the sanity you save will be your own. And you'll
I'm literally taking, I'm saying, reach out to our AdThrive person as I talk to you. Could you talk to me about schema?
So yeah, schema is just a way for Google to understand the concept of a page. A schema is a way for Google to crawl a page and kind of understand contextually what's involved. We can make entity associations, like I can know that an author of a page is here because I have author schema on the page telling me this is who wrote it. And then we have little markup that lets Google programmatically crawl the page and generate what are called rich snippets. A rich snippet is a physical manifestation of schema. So for those of you on the call, if you're going through your site, throwing through the search listings and you see star ratings, or maybe you're a recipe site and you see that there's a cook time there, or maybe you're seeing those featured images, that's all generated by schema. Schema is just a way for Google to better understand and algorithmically crawl content. The problem is that a lot of people, and even SEOs that have been doing this for years, completely believe that schema is a ranking factor. It is absolutely not a ranking factor. What it is it's just a way for Google to better understand the content. Okay, Google.
So right,
it doesn't matter.
It's kind of like Google's reading, let's say, a recipe.
Absolutely,
and it will infer, but it'll infer cook time. But you could tell Google, oh, Google, this is cook time with schema.
Absolutely. Schema is just a way for us to provide more information for users and for Google. That's it, bottom line. But is schema a ranking factor? It's absolutely not a ranking factor. What it does, though, is it can increase conversion. So if I have one site with the recipe for meatloaf and they're not using schema, it's going to be a very ugly looking listing. There might not even be a photo. There might not be any information on the listing in the search results showing things like cook time, prep time. There may not be any ratings. There may not be any stars. There may not be a calorie count. And then I have recipe number 2, which is using a full schema plugin, whether that's WP Recipe Maker or Tasty or Create or one of the many other recipe plugins out there, that is fully exporting out the accepted recipe schema that Google supports. That's going to populate that data on the front end, and it's going to make a visual difference to the user on how they're going to interact with that content. I now see a nice thumbnail showing the finished dish. I now see a calorie count. I now see some cook time info. I now see maybe there's hyperlinks down there. Maybe they put jump links in there. Maybe they have emojis. You can do all this stuff. You can add all of these ways to enhance. We call these search enhancements. Now, Google has been really good lately about actually generating search enhancements without schema completely, which is really interesting because that's how they've progressed. But for anyone who would tell you that schema is a ranking factor, they fail to understand how schema works.
But if
schema can increase conversion,
right?
But it's not a ranking factor.
But if I have 2 meatloaf recipes and one is marked up with all of this information that Google then, like the stars and stuff like that, and then I have one that isn't, is Google more apt though to show the one on page 1 with the stars and the cook time and all of that?
Nope, because that's not how Google works. Now in your question, algorithmically, it doesn't matter whether or not I have schema. I'll still have two recipes on the front page of Google, but the schema allows me to qualify for carousels, and that's the difference.
Okay.
So if you want to get into carousels, then we want to use schema. But again, not a ranking factor. Okay. A ranking factor means that if I don't do this, I'm not going to rank as high.
Right.
That's not how it works. Schema is allowing us to enhance the content to make it more semantically attractive to Google.
So Google will show it in a different place.
And also to make it more attractive visually to users so we could possibly have them interact with the content. But that from a bottom line standpoint, though, schema is just an enhancement, nothing more.
Got it. Could we talk about duplicate content? We kind of touched on it when it came to things like the AIs. In fact, I saw a talking about how, Google does not like these AIs writing your content. I saw a image of a piece of content written by an AI, and it was in blocks where you could see that the AI pulled like the first paragraph from some blog, pulled the second paragraph from another blog, but like it's kind of jumped, like mixing and matching content it is finding on the internet to create, because it's not like an AI has its own brain and is actually writing content. It is pulling content from different sources.
Well, yes and no. That's actually Jasper, Phrase, and Write actually can write their own content.
Okay.
They're just pulling. It's just that they use various. And let's kind of I don't want to get too detailed on this, but basically think of. There's basically two main algorithms out there that a lot of these tools are based upon. The first one is called GPT-3, which is a generative pre-trained transformer 3. And it's a language prediction model that uses deep learning to create human-like texts. It can absolutely write entire conversations. It's the first and so far the only artificial intelligence to pass the Turing test. That is being used in a lot of these tools. So you absolutely can use that to generate long lists of content and text. I'm going to tell you, it's scary. We better enjoy our machine overlords because they're very close. Long story short, we also have the second main kind of algorithm there. It's called NLP, which is just natural language progression. And those algorithms rely on machine learning to automatically learn rules by analyzing a set of examples. So in other words, we could have something like a large corpus or a collection of sentences, and then the algorithm can scan all of that and then make statistical inferences. And that's also put into various tools like Phrase and AdThrive's topic tool. And those all work together very similarly. And the goal of these tools is, of course, to generate this content. And I think Google has really understood. I think that's why they updated the guidelines back on 4.13 to say AI generated content is against their guidelines, because it is getting so good that they might have to look at it a little bit more closely, which is kind of interesting because John Mueller also said on Twitter a while back that AI content is just not there yet. So it's really interesting to see how that pans out. But yes, AI is something that we should be aware of. It is something that is widely being used right now, and it is certainly something that you have to be aware of. It's certainly something I would not rely on that much, but it is there. It's being used by many sites. In the previous days, it was basically just we would call it spun content. And what you've described as spun content previously in your example, where they were taking sentences from here, sentences from there, and it really looked like unique content, but it was just gibberish. And the spun content would rank. And that would rank very well. And the sad part is that is still alive in a lot of areas. A lot of really low quality affiliate areas still use a little bit of spun content, but I think Google's gotten a lot smarter. But back to your question about duplicate content. Duplicate content is something that a lot of people are confused on, even experienced SEOs, or at least people who say that they're experienced SEOs. Duplicate content is not a penalty. Google does not have a duplicate content penalty, far from it. Google just understands that there are various versions of a piece of content, and they will just filter out the versions that they feel that are very close or that don't necessarily jive with the one version that they've chosen. Duplicate content is also a between pages or between sites concept. I could literally go onto a recipe page and have 4 paragraphs say the exact same thing. It is not duplicate content. Google's going to rank in the whole page. It's just not going to be great for users. Now, if I have 4 or 5 paragraphs of shared content across my entire site, maybe that's content that Google is going to filter out. I'm just not going to get any credit for it. But are those pages not necessarily going to rank? Well, probably not as well, but it's only because it's a very poor experience for users, not necessarily because I use the 4 or 5 paragraphs the same on every page. And that's why a lot of bloggers struggle with this duplicate content. Like, it's okay to have, for example, reusable CTAs that we have on our site with the block editor. It's okay to have a section where maybe I have a section in my recipes where I have this 5 baking tips thing and I have it on every page. Again, not going to kill you. It's fine. Your goal is just to understand that when we're writing content, we need to be as unique as we can. I don't want to have an article here, then take the same article and put it on 4 other sites and think that I'm going to garner any advantage from doing that. And it's not because Google's penalizing me. It's because I was stupid enough to put a 100% reprinted version of my content on 4 other sites, which is not great for users, and Google's not going to rank me competitively for that. Okay. So I think that's where people get confused.
So there is no penalty. So I'm just reiterating, there's no penalty. It's just that Google is hopefully finding the original, giving that blog post or site credit, and then everything else just kind of lost in the wash.
Yeah, I mean, John Mueller has clarified misconceptions about duplicate content recently. He said that it's not a negative search ranking factor at all. I mean, we either believe what he says or we don't. I'm of the opinion that Google says this stuff for a reason. It's not to mislead us. We have to take them at their word. And he's saying that one of the misconceptions that we have about duplicate content is that it's going to hurt you negatively. And he says it's not. What are you going to say? He also says that having the same content repeated across multiple pages is not something that would cause a site to rank lower in search results. Again, direct quote. So we either believe him or we believe someone who decided to start SEO in 2007 and has just been completely misunderstood since. That's just one of the things that we have to worry about. Mueller is also very clear that it's normal for sites to have a certain amount of duplicate content and that Google's algorithms are built to handle it at scale, which again makes total sense. Anytime, like I said earlier, if we can think it, we just assume that Google knows it already. And that's a good one.
That's funny because I would say my husband, David, who's also, technologist, says the exact same thing because I ask him these questions and he'll be like, hey, don't think that Google can't see this or read this or understand this. So very, very similar to you. One last question. Does Google take into account social media? I've got, let's say, 100,000 followers on Instagram, or it knows anything about me there, or is looking at my posts on LinkedIn, or does any of this matter for my own personal authority, for my website, because I'm linking to it on my Instagram account, like anything like that?
Honestly, no. Social signals are a very muddy signal to Google. They've said it for years. They do not use social signals at all algorithmically, at all. As a matter of fact, for years, they didn't even count social links at all. Recently, Twitter made waves when they removed no follow from a lot of their tweets. We don't know necessarily how that's going to play out, but in most cases, social media is just so muddy and it's so easy. I mean, I could literally go out tonight, Jillian, and buy 10,000 followers on any of the platforms I wanted, or I could go out and buy placements across any of the top media social profiles out there. Why would Google use those kind of metrics when they can be so easily gamed? And I would say that the answer to that is they probably do not and haven't. I mean, there's multiple notations from Gary Yeesh, John Mueller, Matt Cutts from years ago, where Google has been very clear, we do not use social signals. We never have, we don't. Waste of time. And that brings us kind of to our final note, which is on the context. If you look at when we're talking about, how Google search works, we've talked about the meaning, the relevance, the quality. We talked a little about usability and making sure that, we optimize for page experience, that we optimize for accessibility, all of that. Now we've come to context. And when we talk about context, we're talking about the information served by means of your location, your past search history, your search settings, all of that. I think another confusing thing for a lot of bloggers and publishers out there is that search is literally 100% personalized. It really is. What you're seeing, Jillian, at your end is not what I'm going to be saying on my end. Your search settings are an important indicator of what Google is going to provide, even my preferred language or whether I've opted into safe search. Do I have that turned on? I mean, I could type in Barcelona. For example, they use an example of Barcelona where you could type in Barcelona and even search Barcelona versus Arsenal for football or soccer. And it depends upon where you're located, what you're going to get. The systems, Google's really clear that their systems are designed to match interest. They're not designed to infer sensitive information like, your political affiliation, your race or religion, but it's designed to match based upon your search history. So honestly, if I'm And again, I work a lot within the recipe niche. If I'm a recipe blogger and I tend to search for my own recipes quite a bit, hey, guess what I'm going to be served more? My own recipes. And that could be a little discerning for you when you're trying to do competitive research or things like that. Or maybe you're on your mobile device and you're not realizing that, you've set your search habits or how Google is dictating your personal discover feeds. It's how Google is dictating your daily briefing. It's how Google is dictating what results they're showing you on mobile, how these carousels are populated. We want to understand that a big part of understanding search is understanding context. And a big part of context is, again, personalization. So very important that you understand that and that you adjust accordingly and not make any assumptions on why you are ranking and someone else isn't, without understanding or turning off your personalized search options.
So are you always searching in, say, incognito windows to get a more accurate assessment of the landscape?
I actually even take it a step further than that. I have multiple IP addresses. So I have multiple IP addresses so that I can actually go around and see what's ranking depending upon the area. I can also use a VPN or a virtual private network to determine what is ranking and where, depending upon what I'm looking at, which has been very interesting when people are like, Casey, I'm seeing this here. Are you seeing that? And I'm like, yeah, I can see it on this Google web server here, but I can't see it on this Google web server over here on the East Coast. So something like that. And it's fine. I mean, the average person should not worry about that stuff, but you also have to understand that what you're seeing on the front end is not necessarily what your next door neighbor is seeing or what the majority of your existing audience to your blog is seeing specifically.
Would you, just to close, I think that there has been this shift in my audience, which are similar to the people that you serve, which is, I feel like in the beginning, it was chasing social media algorithms and especially Pinterest for traffic and frustration that Instagram wasn't driving traffic. But as these social media platforms continue to change in not always intuitive ways or not always in ways that help creators, I feel like people have rediscovered or are discovering SEO because it feels more sane.
Right. It's not necessarily a question of sanity. It's more of a question of consistency. Google users, site publishers are looking for more consistent avenues of traffic, and social is just not that anymore. I can't tell you how many bloggers have come to me after having their social traffic cut in half and trying to replace that with Google. And honestly, that should be their first focus anyway. Google should be your main source of traffic. If it's not 60 or 70%, there's a problem. So the great things happen when bloggers come to me and they're like, oh my God, 70% of my traffic was from Pinterest. Usually we're able to make very quick, very big gains, but it involves us rewriting their content away from the Pinterest audience and more towards your regular non-social audience. And it's a big change where, we're not stuffing the pages with finished shots. We're not having lots of long pins beyond the page itself. We hide pins. We make our page more consistent, more user-friendly, more optimized for users. There's a very specific approach. And I've been very fortunate that we've been doing, over the last several years specifically, I've been doing tons of usertesting.com studies with thousands of people all over the United States, asking them specifically, what is it that you're looking for when you're trying to find a recipe post? And I'm going to tell you, folks, it's not a 10-page recipe post. It's not a 4-page card that prints out. It's not 7 photos of the finished dish. It's not an ad every 3 paragraphs.
Okay,
Those are the kind of things.
What is it? What is it? What do people want?
You'll have to schedule on to find that out. So you get on my schedule. I'll give you my secretary's information. You're good to go. But no, it's really writing for users. We write for user experience. Whenever you hear these things about, oh my God, I hate visiting recipe sites because they started with this huge preamble about how they grew up on a farm and that's where they got this recipe. If you're reading that blogger has never had an audit with me because that's not what users are looking for. That's something that they've read. That's some advice they've gotten from their ad company. That's something that is just completely contrary to what exists and works in the recipe niche specifically, which I've been very fortunate to specialize in since 2015. But that has allowed me to see at scale what works and what does not work. And our goal is to optimize focus on the technical and content issues of a site. Make sure that the site is as semantically sound, make sure that the site loads fast, making sure that we've corrected things like internal redirects, that we've made sure that the schema is correct, that we've again, implemented a template that they can use to start updating most of their older content, that they understand how to correctly conduct keyword research, that they understand what advice to take and what advice to ignore from their ad companies or from their providers, that they understand that pop-ups can be run, but they have to be run correctly, or that they understand, if you're going to use a provider, here are the vetted providers that tend to have a good reputation and will provide long-term stability with your mailing list and other supported template needs. All of that goes hand in hand. So we take a holistic approach, which is why I always kind of laugh when because there's a strong contingent of people out there, and a lot of them are associated with ad companies that say audits are a complete waste of time, which is just so funny because I can't tell you, I'm literally the most popular person in Ramona, California during Christmas because I have so many people yearly send me cookies and breads and bottles of alcohol because I've literally changed their life. They've bought second homes. They've paid off their college debt. They've retired. And they've done it because the audit has allowed them to quit a job that they hated, or to embrace a hobby and turn it into a business, or to finally take their business to the next level. And I take that extremely seriously. And I also write them thank you notes and publicly praise them on Facebook whenever they send me Huckleberry cookies or anything that has candy corn in it, which is very popular. So I've been very fortunate in that regard.
Okay, Casey, if people have questions, want to book an audit with you, find out more about what you do, where should they go?
Well, you just type in Casey Markee into Google. I have literally destroyed and eliminated all other Casey Markees in the world. They do not exist. I control the first 10 pages of Google. Casey Markee, last name Markee. My audit calendar opens up on Monday, August the 1st. And at that time, I will be booking for December 2022 and January and February 2023. So make a note of that. You can reach me online at my website, MediaWise. That's MEDIAWY as in yellow, SE.com. Just go to the contact me page. You can take a look at the information there, or just type in Casey Markee podcast. I have done, my goal is to continue to publish resources like this that are hopefully helpful to the majority of bloggers, kind of eliminate a lot of the incorrect, maybe some of the SEO myths, some of the other incorrect information that's out there. That's our goal here. And it's not because I necessarily know more than anyone else. It's just that I literally, this is all I do.
Yeah,
I 100% 24/7 SEO auditing. I spend minimum of 15 to 20 hours a week just reading patent filings and just making sure that I'm networking with the people who are smarter than me. And there's lots of people more smarter than me. So it's really easy to do. And they tell me what's hot. They tell me what's not. They tell me where I should focus my energies. And my goal is to try to impart a little of that to you so that you can work smarter and not harder.
Well, Casey, I always learn so much from you. So this is your second time on the podcast. I know there's going to be a third. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming back.
Pleasure is entirely mine. I wish you and the husband a very happy summer. Stay cool. And we'll speak again very soon. Thanks for having me.
I hope you guys like this episode. I love having Casey on the show because he cleans stuff up, like all of these rumors about duplicate content, spammy links, domain authority. I always feel like he tells me what I need to worry about and what I don't. I just wanted to say one last thing about MiloTreeCart before I go. And that is, it is the best way to test your product ideas because of the unlimited free sales pages, unlimited products you can add, and you only pay once you start making sales. So please head to MiloTreeCart.com like right now and set up a product like a paid workshop, a membership, coaching, a digital download. But just go experiment, set up a sales page, put it in front of your audience and see if they purchase. That's how you build a business. If you want to show me your sales page, I'd love to give you feedback. Just email me at Jillian@MiloTree.com and I will see you here again next week.